Aaron?
We tend to focus a lot on the internal organizational culture. Um, I've noticed that leading companies that are really known to be innovative also kind of raise the level of consciousness of how we interact with the environment, or how we shape regulation, or how we shape communities. What I was curious is, from your perspectives, how does the external environment shape your organization's creative definition? And how does that definition change with the external environment?
Ooh, I can tell you from the business I'm in, that's about as timely as you can imagine. The regulations that we have to deal with as a company for children, with the regulations with the use of lead, the regulations of things that are in plastic, and those plastic things go in babies' mouths. So the things that we have to do that affect our creativity are actually quite vast. And as a big corporation and as a leader in the industry, when we have missteps, which have happened recently with lead, we have to make sure that we represent what's good about the company and what's good about the industry, and to accept that a mistake was made and change it, and then be a change leader. Actually, it's that's such a big deal, because the one thing, again, as an industry that deals with babies and children, you can't lose the trust that you have with parents. And so the changes that are being made throughout the industry, not just with Mattel, are being led now by Mattel and Fisher-Price. And so I think that's a very good example of responsibility to your environment. The other thing I think that's really important with any industry is how involved you are with your community, and how does that infuse the people that work within your company, and going back outward, Day of Caring, working with United Way, Habitat for Humanity, and any time that anyone wants to do anything like that within our company, it's not even a blink. It's like, yeah, just do it. It's good for you. It's good for the company. It's good for the people you work with. So I think that, again, is part of the culture, is you're not just putting product on the table to make money. You're making people better. I think that's the thing that's so important about working in a toy company, is that, as silly as a little thing might be that we're doing, every time we make a relationship between mom and dad and their baby a happy memory, it's like you're building a person. You have a role in building that person, and I think that's just an important thing that, again, I believe is infused throughout, not just the designers, anyone who works at my company. It's very important.
Again, with regulations in food, obviously there are a ton of regulations when it comes to food, and consumers' eating behaviors are changing all of the time, and the trends, and this whole thing with trans fat and non-trans fat. We have got to be creative every day when it comes to reformulating product to get that stuff out. And our food is all decadent. Our food is all, it's cookies and brownies and cakes and toppings. So, we're not a low-cal type of food product. However, as consumers do say, what, we're don't want to eat as much bread and rolls and all of that, all the carbs. What do we do to react to that, and react quickly in order to serve those needs? So it's constantly being aware of what's happening outside of the company and what we need to do in order to meet those demands and needs to stay competitive is extremely important. And when it gets back to the community, it's absolutely giving back to the community, and that's one of our values, is doing what's right. And so we have got all sorts of initiatives going on, from again, Meals on Wheels and Day of Caring, and we have organized groups going out there and saying, what, we have to be conscious of what the communities are, and that happens across the world too. I was over in the UK not too long ago, and there's this park with Rich Products' name on it, and that's a park that we keep clean over there. So it's extremely important across the world to continue to be good communities, be good neighbors in our communities, and be aware of the impact that we're having, and just making sure as we do different packaging, what is the best packaging and how do we make sure it's recyclable. So what we used to do last week has got to change this week and change next week, because if we just stay where we used to be, we're not going to remain competitive and survive. So it has to do not with just our bottom line and us being profitable, but making sure we understand the community needs, the consumer needs, and reacting to them and giving back.
I think the important thing also is trends, is to observe the trends in society and how does it affect your product, as you said about calories and trans fats. That same trend of childhood obesity, it's another way of looking at our calorie issues, was something that we had to say, what role can we play in helping? We obviously can't prevent it. We can't necessarily change behaviors, but we can provide product that gets kids more active. And so one of the ways that we started thinking, again, when we were doing our long-range planning was, all right, one of my groups is a learning group, so I do overt learning products. Sometimes that's considered medicine to a lot of kids, so, geez, how are we going to make that fun? Well, at the same time, we say, okay, moms and dads really want that kind of product, but kids would rather watch TV. But kids also really like to be active. How do we do all of that together and make a great toy? So that's where the product Smart Cycle came from, which was a little riding, it's like a ride-on toy that in front of the TV that you're learning, but you really think you're at Chuck E. Cheese and you're at an arcade. So that whole connection of taking the trend of childhood obesity, the trend of interactive gaming, and the trend of needs for literacy and education, all of which are really important trends. How can we put it together and make a really great product that, oh, by the way, makes a company a lot of money? Because we have to think like that as well. So being able to weigh out, the money that we need to make and satisfy shareholders with the good that we want to do for the children, the parents, and the educators, that's really important, that whole idea of assimilating all of those needs. Again, they become societal needs with these trends as well.
What do you see as, let's look to the future for a minute. And if you think about, I'm going to rework this a little, your role and the role of others in building a more creative society. Kind of like the question. I changed the question a little bit, but
Throwing us off.
yeah, I'm throwing you off.
We studied.
I studied the questions.
Well, just as I've sat here and I've listened to both Shari and Miriam, it reminds me that we need more. We need more of this within organizations. And it just can't start sometimes. I think you heard some of the tenure at Fisher-Price. So it just can't start in business. It almost has to go all the way down in this continuum of learning, all the way to K through 12, and then even beyond K through 16. Beyond that, then it requires learning and developing. So if you can imagine using creativity, putting creativity back in the school systems again, where now you're starting to teach it and it's starting to be learned at earlier ages. And you, again, at the college level, where you start to see it again at the college level, so that by the time you do get into the workplace, 10 years from today, it could be a totally different environment in the business community because it's more accepting. They've learned to use it. So from a creative change of the future, I'd certainly love to be able to see the word creativity a good thing and not a fuzzy thing, and see that it gets that through the entire continuum of learning.
So important. That's Sue mentioned earlier that she taught my kids, and that was actually Sue's program at Campus West in Buffalo, and she had my kids, I think, at 4 and 5 years old,
Yeah,
and
very young.
so that's when, I mean, if not before, just that whole idea, I think it really, we can't necessarily depend on the schools. We want the schools to teach creatively, absolutely, but in reality, it's about the parents. It's about how we as adults are and how comfortable we are being parents and having this ability to mold our children, to start them out right, and to make them independent children and think creatively. So when creativity as a word gets brought up in school, it's not foreign to them. It's what they do. It's what is accepted in their home. And so I think that's the thing for all of us who are around kids, whether they're our kids, our grandchildren, or somebody else's kids, is to just infuse children with creativity and also to be a part of their lives in school. So if you don't see it enough in school, you become a part of it in school. I think that is so very important. And again, I thank Sue quite a bit because my kids still remember. I have a almost 17-year-old and a 14-and-a-half-year-old, and they still remember Miss Sue.
So it was a partnership, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Partnership.
And the kids are very comfortable with all the hands-on and the thinking and teaching the creative process to little kids. They suck it up. It's great stuff. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, I think it's all about continuing to encourage children and people to keep that childlike look. And when you said, don't fear failure, this weekend I had my one niece over. She's 8 years old. She's playing with eggs. We were going to make eggs for breakfast, and she's playing with them. I said, honey, just leave the eggs alone. You're going to break them. Don't touch them anymore. And I turned, and what do I hear? Splat right on the floor. So I turned around and I says, what did I tell you? I asked you not to play with the eggs. And she looked up and she said, but now it's perfect because there's 3 people. We had 7 eggs. Now there's only 6.
There you go.
And, she looked at a bad situation and, made a logical sense out of it and very positive. So how do we learn from that instead of saying, holy cow, we screwed up here, we messed up. But what is the positive, and how do you just continue to encourage that and, just value that childlike perspective? So, in children, continue to nurture it, and when you get into the workplace, continue to nurture it, and, just overall, I try and work with different organizations outside the company because it reminds me how important that is. My church and a couple churches have asked me, can you do strategic planning? Can you do some team building? Just recently worked with another organization with breast cancer, and they were trying to develop a strategic vision. And so I just find so many applications. And so if we continue to infuse this thinking, and it's just a little bit at a time, but value what it's all about and get different people to value that and work with it all the time, I just think it's just going to make a world of difference.
Keeps you sharp, too, when you work with different organizations that are outside
Absolutely.
your normal group, those different perspectives that you get.